everybody. Raina here for another Book Banter, and thank you for joining us. Tonight, we are celebrating National Poetry Month again. I have three amazing local poets, Nikki Ummel, Carolyn Hembree, and Lisa Pasold, that are all joining me this evening. And I'm super excited to get in and to talk to them. They are all award-winning poets, and I'm going to post the links to their websites later so you can read all about their amazing work. If you have any questions at any point throughout the evening, just type them in the comments and we will answer them in real time. So without further ado, let me welcome Nikki Ummel, Lisa Pasold, and Carolyn Hembree. Yay! Hi, ladies.
Hello.
Hi. Thanks for inviting us.
Yes, thanks for joining me. This is going to be exciting because I have written poetry off and on since I was like 12. It was an assignment in school. I've just kind of been addicted to it ever since, kind of as a form of journaling personally. So National Poetry Month is always fun for me, and I'm glad you're all here to join me and celebrate. First off, I just told my little story of how I got started writing poetry. So I'd love to hear how each of you got started.
Who wants to go first?
Ooh, Nikki, go.
Yeah, so similarly, I wrote a lot growing up, often under guise of, like hiding in the closet or under the blanket or something. It was a very private and personal thing, and it was a way to process. And when I moved to New Orleans, actually, I started writing a lot. I think that's it. The city does that to a lot of people. And it was after I had quite an extensive little portfolio that the person I was seeing at the time was like, you should, I was teaching, and they were like, you should, maybe consider doing something with your writing. And so I actually applied to the MFA program at UNO. And part of my application was, I want to be a better writer so I can teach other people how to be better writers. And so that was my whole shtick, was like, how am I supposed to teach this if I don't know how to do it myself? And through that process, it became my main thing, I think. So here we are a couple years later, and it's something I do almost every day.
Nice. I've been attempting to write some kind of poem for every day for past 16 years. So most days I manage it. Not good poems. The entire deal with this writing a poem every day is it can be a very short poem. It can be a really terrible poem. That doesn't matter. But I actually got my start in poetry by writing an awesome fan fiction poem for The Cat in the Hat when I was, I guess, 6. Yes, I was a very committed Dr. Seuss fan. And I've advanced into, other poems since then. The Cat in the Hat is still pretty high up there. And then I was also really lucky because as a little kid, my mom decided she would get master's in lit, and I'm from Montreal, and so she got a master's in Canadian literature, which at the time was quite radical. And so I got to go to cafe readings by people like Margaret Atwood when they were doing poetry readings. So it was very cool. It was a very cool introduction to the idea that poetry was this live community that you kind of stepped into, and it embraced all kinds of expressions of who you were and who other people were, and you could talk about a lot within this very loose framework. So I was really lucky, actually. I only started publishing poetry in 2004, I guess, so almost 20 years, but it's been a little while. But yeah, Cat in the Hat all the way.
Love it. What about you, Carolyn?
I guess I started writing poetry when I was in 9th grade, and it was as a sort of pseudo punishment, not the poetry, but I was placed in a very, very strict conservative private school. and which really ran counter to the beliefs of my parents, who both were, when I was really little, professors. And anyways, that long and short of it, I was put in this like really restrictive school for a year that, you know, would show these horrible, during like recess, they would show videos of you know, that we were to learn from, of girls who, you know, maybe had a drink at a party and then wound up, God knows, you know, having sex. And then of course they're pregnant, you know, multiple times, and drug addicts, and all of those things that happen.
That'll do it.
So it was this, and girls weren't allowed to run for student class president. We had to wear skirts every day. It was just a living hell. And so I was listening to Shout at the Devil, you know, who does that song? But anyways, on my headphones in the morning, and during prayer, and just rebelling, you know, just drinking and being terrible. But the good thing that came out of it all, or maybe that was the good thing, I don't know. But I had an English teacher named Mrs. Bola, and I was placed in advanced English there, which was a good thing. And Mrs. Bola assigned us, you know, to write a poem. And so I wrote a poem. And it was that moment where somebody, you know, a teacher pulls your poem out of the stack. And she pulled me aside. I think she was somewhat concerned about my subject matter, which hasn't really changed. She pulled me aside, but she also like got a friend of hers who was a professional poet, whatever that is. And this person generously read my poems and gave me feedback, and it made me feel really important. And like Nikki, I sort of, my father was very encouraging of my writing, but I wrote surreptitiously a good bit during my younger years.
Okay, we run the gambit of stories, and I love that. I love that. From Dr. Seuss to, yeah, I was rebelling and drinking, and poetry saved me. I love this. And Alan Brickman says that he has One Fish, Two Fish on the poetry shelf because Dr. Seuss, yeah, I mean, Dr. Seuss is inspiring, whether you're going to write poetry or you're going to like climb to the top of that mountain, right? Like that's the magic of Dr. Seuss. So I love that. So you guys, you all have published poetry now, and when did you guys decide to make that change? Like go from the journal to like, maybe I'll put it out there. Cause that is, I mean, for anybody, no matter what kind of writing you do, the difference between it's in my personal journal to maybe it's on my like blog to, hey, I'm going to put this really out there to the world, send it to a review or put it in a chat book. That's always interesting to me. Like what pushed you to do that? Was it you? Was it somebody else recommending it? Like Nikki mentioned. Yeah. Yeah.
I can go first with that one too. So I'm still like very much a baby poet. Especially compared to Carolyn and Lisa, who have like this amazing long career. Lisa was like, oh, only 20 years ago. And I'm like, 3 years ago. So I started. What?
It went real fast.
I'm looking forward to be able to say that though. Like, oh yes, when I was just beginning. But yeah, so my first semester of the MFA program, it was like the last week of classes, and I was in this workshop, this poetry workshop with people who had all been published. And I was like, can everyone write down journals that they recommend, like that's publishing in? And so I like passed around this notebook and people wrote down journals that they liked. And that's literally how my list started. So I went home over winter break and I was like, made a little submittable account and like submitted work to the 6 places that I was given on this list. And I think like the first real like big one was the MFA program has 2 poetry contests, in-house poetry contests. And it was my first year and I won both of them. And that's when I was like, oh shit. Like I think I can do this. Like, I think this can be more than just I'm doing this because I'm a teacher thing. This can be like I'm doing this because I love it and other people like to read it type of thing.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
I think I actually started thinking of myself as a poet through groups of friends, because we like read poetry and write very journal oriented poems to each other. And a friend, one day I met him for coffee, and I was like 20, and he picked up my journal and said, oh, okay, so I'll read this. And I was like, oh, okay. He took it away, and like 2 days later I saw him for a drink, and he was like, it was much more personal than I expected. I was like, it's my journal, what did you expect? Anyway, and then I was like, well, okay, if that didn't bother me, then I can probably just share these things. And I started out doing them much more as readings rather than sending them to journals. Journals came later, and book, like I said, was 2004. But initially it was much more spoken, and readings. I started doing readings like way before I got published. So just because I think that's partly how I came into poetry, was going to readings and appreciating that experience. So even though I'm very page-based in my work, I came at it very much from a spoken kind of direction.
Mm-hmm.
So it was discussion with people and reading poems by other people that I loved, famous dead people and living people and friends and so forth.
I think I always had, I don't know that I made, well, I did make some decisions to put it out there, but I didn't feel like a strong division between doing that and keeping it private, which I guess sounds a little at odds with writing surreptitiously, but I did, in high school, I got recognition, it was, you get a little plaque for the best poem or whatever, and was involved in a high school literary magazine. And I think, my father had always, there were always books around us. My father was a German professor, my mother was a French professor. So there was, I remember sitting down and reading in the Norton with my dad. He was translating Celan and Rilke, and he would run his translations by me when I was a little kid. And, we would go back and forth about that. And I remember reading Mallarmé and sort of working with the French, while we were sitting there at the, which I'm not very good at, but helping me to kind of translate it and understand it. So I was very lucky to have that kind of normalized in a way that if I was writing poetry, it would go into print. Like that would just kind of happen. Little did I know. And then I forgot, I think it was probably my dad who bought me the Poets Market, is what we had back in the day. Mm-hmm. Yeah, pre-submittable. You're with me, Lisa. Yeah, the Poets Market. So it was this thick text. It was hardback. I think it came in hardback and softback. It was so wildly popular. And it listed, a newspaper print listed every literary magazine that cared to be listed, and ranked them as like either send this, as a beginner, send to this place, or as a more advanced writer, perhaps you will send to wherever. And I remember Poetry Magazine had as their model poem the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock. And even then it was just like, oh my God, are you kidding me? Like that's, it's like, really, poetry? Come on. And I sent off, this is why you see the magazine before you send off to it. I sent off to, my first publication was in a magazine called Art Core. That's 2 words. It sounds kind of like hardcore. And the magazine arrived. It was a kind of zine that was saddle stapled and had straight pins through it, and showed various surgeries catheterization, pictures of catheterization, scars, various procedures, and my poem, as well as several other poems. So that was my first publication.
Do you have a copy?
I have not found it lately, but I know it's in one of my boxes, and that's one of my goals this year is to go find that copy of ArtCore. It was out of Austin, Texas.
Sounds about right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking to something Lisa said about events and poetry readings, because when I was growing up, like I had heard of poetry readings, never heard of a book signing. Like that an author would come and you'd line up or they'd talk to you and sign your book. You know, I'd never heard of that. But poetry readings happened at a coffee shop. Like we didn't even have that many coffee shops where I grew up in Florida. But like at the time, the downtown was very individual, right? Mom and pop stores. There was a little coffee shop. There was a couple little bars, and they did have poetry readings. That was the thing that I just knew existed. In a way, I mean, it might be the only like literary event that I was familiar with. Which now, being an event specialist at the bookstore, and I know there's all these other things that just seems kind of crazy, but I ask people, and like if you guys think back, Lisa, you were talking about going to poetry readings, but were you all exposed to other types of literary events when you were younger? Like, when did you know that book signings existed?
My mom worked in libraries and was doing this master's degree, so I went to it, like, it was all literary a lot of the time. So it was great because there were always books coming in, and both my parents were like, read whatever you want, listen to whoever you want. It's all good. You figure it out. We'll you know, sort of shake our hands and tear our hair somewhere off screen, but it's fine. So yeah, I did, but I think it's because I had a weirdly literary mother. So yeah.
What about you, Nikki?
Yeah, I think the first time I heard about it was when I was deeply immersed in the Harry Potter series. And on the news, She Who Must Not Be Named was signing books. And I remember being like, oh my God, I want one of those books. Like, that was so cool. And then I probably didn't think about it for another 20 years. So the last couple of years where like it really, and now like I buy authors' books and I bring them to their readings and I have them sign them. I'm like, I'm holding on to it. And it's so important that this person signs this book that I bought 6 months ago. So yeah, it's a big difference, but I love the proliferation of book signings. I love that it's not just the multi-million-dollar bestseller world tour writers who are having that now. I love that anyone who has a book can have that experience. It's nice.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Stephen King's probably not coming to the bookstore, but it is amazing to be able to like be a part of giving this type of experience to people. It doesn't matter whether it's literally just a broadside all the way to New York Times bestseller. It's that like moment where you're sitting there and if you're on this side of the table, all these people came to talk to you and hear you speak. And if you're on the other side, it's like this moment to really connect with a poet or an author that you have maybe been reading for years or been sitting in the back of the room when they read a poem and you're like, okay. And then you duck out because you're too afraid to talk to them. Kind of gives you that moment to do that.
Real quick side note, though, Stephen King has a summer home in Sarasota, Florida, where I'm from, and he used to come to our Dollar Theater and watch movies. So if you wanted Stephen King to sign books, I feel like I know someone who knows how to make that happen.
Well, Nikki, you and I will talk later.
Okay.
What about you, Carolyn? When do you remember like knowing book signings existed, like, or even poetry readings? Because you didn't mention that. Like,
no, I mean, I think that I was kind of in it was weird. I was kind of in a vacuum in that way. I was born in Bristol, Tennessee, grew up there until I was 8, and then lived from the time I was around 8 to 22 in Birmingham, Alabama. And I wasn't in touch with that scene. I didn't, I guess I realized kind of poetry readings existed by the time I was in college. I remember going to see Nikki Giovanni, and that was a pretty transformative experience. And Gwendolyn Brooks came to our school, Birmingham-Southern College, a tiny school, tiny liberal arts school. So I started to experience it in that way, and was really lucky with the people that that I got to see early on. Were overwhelming. As far as a book signing, I shouldn't say this. I don't think I was aware of the book signing as a thing until I maybe moved to New York or something after I finished college, and I went to a Barnes & Noble where Joyce Carol Oates was reading and had her sign a book, which was very cool. But I've obviously gone to the book signings, and I love getting it signed, but it's always been a little weird for me. It's a little weird that moment of being on either side of the table, but especially being on the side where I'm signing, and it's like you're really appreciative, but I don't know how much to write or not to write, and then it's just it's wonderful, but the signing itself can be it still feels a little foreign to me, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I can absolutely see that, because it's pressure. I mean, even it's good pressure, but it's pressure nonetheless. So like the spotlight is on you, even after you've done the reading, and now even after you talked a little bit about the poem or the book. Now you're just sitting there, and it's like, okay, we're do this. But it's I from my side, being, an event specialist, just like being a piece of that, and watching this, because this is fun to talk to like multiple people. All three of you have totally different experiences with this and different takes on it, and that's fun. So let me think. What piece of advice would you give people if they wanted to, like, what held you back, I guess, and what piece of advice would you give people to make that leap? Because I noticed something with all three of you is that, well, at least with Nikki and Lisa, you had someone say, hey, this isn't bad, like, kind of give you maybe that little push. Do you feel like that's what really like let you do it? Here's why I'm asking. I will tell you personally why I'm asking you, because this is a personal question. So I've written since I was 12. And when I was 19, I did a self-published book, and my family bought it, so that was great. And and for a while I it was almost like I was trying to check a box, like this is something I wanted to do, and I put all my poetry together, and I put it in a little book, and I self-published it, and that was great, and I checked a box, and I stopped. Like, I wrote in for me, but I just went, I'm good. What pushes you to continue to pursue it? Maybe that's the better question, right? What pushes you to continue to pursue putting it out there?
I have a thought. Because it's something, Carolyn, you said at the fest, actually in discussion with Nikki, I think it was that panel, you were talking about a friend you lost, and you said, I think this is what you actually said, because I wrote it on my phone. So she said she was curious about death, her death, And I thought, okay, maybe that's the source in a way for poetry and for everything that interests me, is this curiosity about what the fuck is going on. But just about the act of living is this curiosity. And what you said, that your entire performance of that work was really powerful, but that it's just stayed chewing away at what I think about as a drive, as a writer, or as a person, living in the world. I think curiosity is, killed the cat, but it's also probably what kept the cat alive. So a bit of both.
It's definitely what keeps life interesting. I mean, you can keep plodding along, just doing the same thing, following that routine for a very long time, but it's boring. I think that might be something that connects all poets that I see, a lot of writers that I see, is that like life gets boring if you're not like, you're taking it in and then you're translating it through your filter, right? We each have these different filters and putting it out on the page. And without that like constant influx of like new and different ways to look at things, or new and different things coming at you, it just, life becomes boring.
Yeah, I really just want to piggyback off of what Lisa said. For me, it's a lot of processing and sharing, and it feels very necessary. It feels central to my understanding of the world, to interpret in that way, and also to be curious and to give that back. And I keep doing it because, in part, so much of what I've been writing about, actually everything I've ever written about, when at every reading, at some point, someone says to me, "Thank you for sharing that. It means a lot. Like, I thought I was alone, and now I feel less alone." Or I've never heard someone talk so openly about their mental health, and I've really been struggling, and that, that felt very healing for me, or some version of that. And so even when it's hard for me to write, and even when I have days where I don't want to have a reading anymore, sometimes that happens. Like, cancel it all. I realized that, like, there's probably someone there that really needs it, and that keeps me going. And so I guess, to combine with your other question, if there's someone out there who doesn't know, if this is for them anymore, or they're hesitant, you're like, everyone's word is valuable, and there's someone out there that needs to hear from you, even if you don't ever know that. So.
And I'm going to read a comment that we have. We have somebody viewing from Pakistan. So hi. They say that we sometimes have feelings that can't be said in words, but you poets make it possible for everyone. And that's, just an example of what you were saying there, Nikki. For sure.
I don't know. It's a very hard question for me. Like, why one does this thing. I think Alberto Blanco visited Arizona when I was there. University of Arizona is where I went for an MFA, and he it was a great moment. I don't know why he did it. I was in line for the book signing, right? And it was my best book signing moment was, I had him sign the book, and he said, why do you do this? Why do you write the poetry, and stuff? Why's this? And I was like, no fucking idea. And he was like, I don't either. I was like, I think if I knew, I wouldn't need to do it. And he was like, I know, me too. We both just started cackling. For a while, I really dialed into William Gass in a Paris Review, one of those, great Paris Review interviews, said that I write because I hate, and I think I loved that because of its iambic sort of measure that you can hear of what if I was going to have a tattoo at one point, maybe in my 30s, that would have been it, maybe my 20s through my 30s. But that's starting to not be true, really. or is too much of one thing, too distilled in a way. So I come back to the fucking.
I think poetry and short forms in general are much more forgiving in our different phases of life. If you write novels, or even if you write nonfiction, I think in their long form, you have a very distinct, like, this is the type of thing you write. And if you turn 45 and you were like at a totally different part of your life and you want to write something completely different, all of a sudden people are like, ooh, this is not like you, this is not you, because they're so used to it. And I feel like poetry, everyone has a style, but even inside one book, you'll see different styles, different days, different moods, different feelings. And have you noticed that, or do you feel that way, where you're kind of allowed a little bit of, like, people maybe don't expect like you're allowed that flexibility as you grow and change in poetry? Or have you written anything else and then you don't have never come across that?
I totally see your point, and I agree. For some writers, that's probably true. Oddly, I actually for years I worked as a journalist, so I was flitting around different styles, different subjects, and in poetry, I write long book length kind of poems. So for me, at least, that's not totally true, even though every day, like I said, I write these very, very small things. And yes, they vary wildly, but then that material I re-edit and redigest and rework. And I tend to get kind of obsessed. This is probably the journalistic mind. I get obsessed with one overall idea and just fight through it. And sometimes I feel like it's not very linear. I'm, still fighting ideas. And I think in the future, I've already fought an idea. I'm now, I'm not sure it's entirely linear, but there are obsessions that I am consistently working through in poetry. And hopefully I'll get some more time to do that. But I don't see that those have shifted actually that much. Maybe there's slight shift, but I think the poetry comes from very deep in who the individual voice is. And although different subjects might appear, I think the core remains pretty consistent, even if it looks different on the page, or it sounds different, or you're suddenly working with a 3/4 rhythm. It's still the same voice for me anyway, in my comprehension of how these things work. But I'd be really interested to hear you guys.
Well, Nikki, I know, because I went to a reading, was it last week or week before, at Windowsill Pies, where the theme was endometriosis. And so that I know, like, as you're going through that, you're clearly writing with that, in that phase and piece of your life. So have you like noticed that it is flexible in that way?
Yeah. I had a reading at Tennessee Tech a month or two ago, and afterwards, someone came up to me and they all had my book imported. They'd all ordered the book in advance, and he was like, "The poems you read today are different than these," and he was like upset, and I was like, "I'm like, this is only like 20 pages. Like, you can't claim to know me in any capacity. First of all, like, ever as a writer, that seems really preposterous to me. But two, like, I'm such a baby writer. Like, you really, I don't know, you didn't think there'd be growth here, or change. And so that was my first encounter with that, where I was just like, dear God, I'm sorry. You felt like, you felt owed that I would continue to write about, my dead parents forever and ever. And I will, actually, but it's going to sound different. It's going to look different because life is different, and I am different, and I'm processing different. And I'm not interested in recreating something I've already done. And I really challenge myself in that way. Today I had published a crossword poem, and I love it. And I like experimenting that way. And so I don't ever want to feel stuck or like beholden. And I do think in that way some fiction writers do get kind of pigeonholed and stuck, where it's like, okay, well, that sold. And so right in that formula again and again and again and again. And, you know, we have the luxury and also the catastrophe as poets where we're not really thinking about what sells, because if we were, we wouldn't be poets. So and it's freeing in that way.
So Carolyn, before you answer, we have another question from the viewers. He's asking, can someone be a poet without having harsh experiences of life? Like somebody say that it's a way to show our pain in words. So you can take that one away, Carolyn.
Oh, okay. So
you get to start.
Great. So the question is, can you write poetry without
having harsh experiences in life?
Well, I mean, I don't. Oh God, I'm not a philosopher, so we got to be careful. But I think that of course, because I mean, human right to some extent to be alive is to suffer and to, you know, whatever, empathy for other human beings and their.
Oh, did she freeze?
She froze. She left us in suspense. We're back.
Okay.
Nicely timed.
I think if you're alive in the year, 2023, as we seem to be, then yeah, you've got a stake in it. You've suffered enough. Go ahead, be a poet. So absolutely, and I mean that truly. No, I don't think that one has to have had some kind of trauma to write poetry at all.
Yeah, there's plenty of poets that write joyful poetry, and it can be about tough things. Yeah. But ultimately, it is very joyful and uplifting work. Ross Gay is the first person that comes to mind for me, where he can be writing about really serious subject matter, but it's still very positive, or maybe that's not the right word for it, but it's very round in all the emotions it's willing to encapsulate. And so, yeah, I don't. Or you can suffer and not write about it, right? Like it can be either or neither.
And Mary Oliver is also someone, I mean,
yes,
who some of her, it depends on which poetry you turn to, but not to say she didn't suffer, but to say that she, you know, her poetry does not necessarily engage with relaying specific traumas. A lot of her poetry that is uplifting.
Yeah, we're going to circle right back to Dr. Seuss here.
Yeah.
Like, I mean,
yeah, I did not do fan fiction for Dr. Seuss out of angst, but I do sort of lean towards the, you know, all human life is suffering and acknowledging that is important, etc. But I do think there's also a really strong tradition of poetry that is a song of joy and a lyric reveling in, you know, either the direction of sort of the Sufi idea of reveling in the divine and that sort of light, or reveling in sort of the less spiritual and actual tangible joys of the physical body. I think there's a huge and wonderful source there. And maybe that also is reacting to pain, but and there's sort of different directions. You know, it's not necessarily that the poet is expressing pain, but is it coming out of pain? Well, that's another question.
Absolutely. All right. We are getting to the end of our time, but I want to ask y'all two more things. Should be fairly easy. One is who should we be reading? It's National Poetry Month. Obviously, you should be reading Nikki, Lisa, and Carolyn's work. But each of you give us one poet that we should know about, we should be reading, we should be looking out for. to celebrate National Poetry Month and beyond. And then tell me what you're working on. What's our next thing? Where can they see you? Where can they hear you? What is that? Go.
I'm going to go first. So no one else steals my answer. And I'm going to plug Charisma Price because her book came out very recently and has skyrocketed into the New York Times book review and all other wonderful places. Charisma Price, I'm Always So Serious. It's her first book. There it is. I have mine on my desk too somewhere in here. And it's just a real banger. And it also like has a lot of poems situated in New Orleans, which is where Charisma is from. So specifically, if you love New Orleans, if you're interested in New Orleans, if you're here, go ahead and check that book out. It is absolutely breathtaking.
I would probably say right now, because of the festival, I was really thrilled to discover a whole bunch of poets that I didn't know or that I did not know enough about their work. And right now I'm probably most surprised that I didn't know her work very well. And that's Harmony Holiday's work. She's phenomenal. She's a phenomenal reader. And her new project is addressing relationship that Americans have with guns, which is super interesting work. So yeah, I think she's amazing. So yeah, but there's so many good books and there's a lot of really great books at the bookshop. So browsing
we have a whole poetry section. So if you can't come up with something, definitely come by and we will
browse.
Do some stuff. I don't see, does Harmony have a book that's available?
She does. God knows the title is not coming to my mind right now. I'm sorry.
Oh, no worries. I found her on, there we go. I got it.
Okay. Thank you.
It just took an extra minute.
I'm not good at book titles, to put it mildly.
Okay. I'm a visual person. So if you show me the cover, I'm like, oh yeah, I know exactly where that is. People will come in and ask me for an author, and I know I blank stare at them way too often. And it's embarrassing because sometimes I've read it. They're like, do you have this? I'm like, yes, now I've seen the picture. Okay. So yeah, it's cool. I get you.
I would add Christine Kwan, since we are, I want to tag somebody who, her book is called A Ribbon, the Most Perfect Blue, and I did just see that it's in at Blue Cypress, but I'm buying that copy. I don't know if you all have more. So I got to hear her at the New Orleans Poetry Festival, and I didn't know her work prior to that on Locals Night, and I was blown away and have a secret poetry crush on her. And her,
that's secret now.
I think we all do. It's like a shared collective crush.
Yeah, and her addresses to Franz Wright, James Wright's son, though that a poet in his own class, doing his thing totally different from his father. But I really loved her poems addressing Franz Wright, and look forward to reading her book. So she's somebody I would definitely tag.
Excellent. All right, now, where can we find what you all are working on, or where you'll be reading next, or tell us about where we can see you and read you?
So I am the featured reader at Lucky Bean in May. So that'll be May 8th. So 2 Mondays from now, which is really cool. And then I have a poem coming out in Arcana. So it's a virtual book launch on this upcoming Monday. So two Mondays back to back. And currently, for 3 more days, I'm having a poem a day published on Tupelo Press's website for their 30 and 30 project. So if you're interested in all the weird things I've been playing with, I have a medical intake form questionnaire on there, crossword puzzle. Sorry to get real desperate. I made a little stop action film out of my niece's drawings. They didn't publish that one. It was too weird. But I can send it to you if you want to see it. But yeah, check out Tupelo Press's website to see my last 27 poems that I've written, all in the last 27 days.
Nice.
Yeah. All right. What you got, Lisa?
I am working on a very slow, long project, which I hope eventually I will finish and it'll get out into the world. And if it does, it'll be my 5th book of poetry, which would be very cool. It's inspired by the incredibly problematic and fascinating con man that is called the founder of New Orleans, Bienville, who was actually a born Montrealer. So he's a Montrealer like me, and really interested in the interplay of languages. He spoke 5 languages. Bolbancha is the land of many languages. We've actually lost all of the ones that were spoken back in his time. Now we have one language, English, which was not a language really here at the time. And so that's all really interests me. And actually, the part of Canada I'm from, that my mom's originally from, has the oldest written language on the continent, long before English, French, Spanish started writing here. So it's a really interesting interplay of place and language. But I'm also part of a 4-woman collective over in France, and every year we do a collective chapbook writing event together, and it's usually in June, so it's coming up in a month, 2 months, about 6 weeks about. So I'm very excited about that.
How would we find that?
That I'll put information about it on my website. Actually,
Okay.
It's with Jennifer K. Dick. She usually publishes some parts of that, and Robert Beck and Michelle Noteboom, and it's really fun. So yeah, I'm
Love it.
excited about that. So yes.
I'm excited about that. I need more information. That sounds fascinating. Like you're part of a writing collective in France. Okay, I'm in. I'm there. Like I don't even need to know anymore. That's all I need to know. I'll read it. What about you, Carolyn?
I am revising. Well, I'm not supposed to be, but I'm doing final tweaks, edits, and revisions on my book that's coming out from LSU Press called For Today. And so that's going to be out early 2024. So we're in the process now of doing, it's not that I'm not supposed to be doing that. I've turned in the final copy, but I'm still making little edits, and that's fine because the copy editors are going to be getting with me soon. So I'm doing that. And I have a poem coming out in 9th Letter, I think, soon. I think it comes out next month, maybe, or a month after, and then Birmingham Poetry Review after that, and a Southern Poetry Anthology. They're doing an Alabama issue, so I was able to squeeze in. That's the nice thing about having lived all these different places in the region. And what else? The next reading is going to be at the Old Metairie Library, and I'll be reading with Christine Kwan and Daniel W.K. Lee and Brad Richard and Gina Ferrara and Cameron Lovejoy at 2:00 on May 6th, Saturday, May 6th, at Old Metairie Library. But the thing I want to share, which is not what I'm working on, but I did work on making this human being, my child, Mamie, is now the poet laureate of Bricolage Academy.
Wow.
So,
Yay.
the
That's so cool.
Yeah, this nonprofit 826 New Orleans, they have this, pizza thing, and all of the different kids write poems as part of it. And each school, somehow, all the kids from the school that go write poems, and then 826 New Orleans, those folks select a winner from every school, and my kid is the poet laureate of their Bricolage Academy. So I'm incredibly, I'm just beaming with pride. Yeah.
As you should be. You're passing it down. I love it.
Oh, they don't want it passed down. They don't want it, but they got it. So, but yeah, I'm very proud.
Yes, you should.
Right on.
Mm-hmm. Well, I want to thank everyone for watching, and thank you for everyone who made comments. And a big thank you to Nikki and Lisa and Carolyn for joining me for National Poetry Month for Book Banter.
Thank you, Raina.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
Absolutely. All right. Bye, everybody.